It's my privilege to introduce our next speaker, who should need no introduction. For anyone who's been around here for the past several years will recognize Dr. Sirinek. I'm very intrigued by the title of his talk, but a little background on Dr. Sirinek. He's a native Chicagoan. Did his preparatory school and college in Chicago, went to medical school in Marquette in Michigan, and then to the Ohio State University for residency, where he took 2 years out in the lab. So he was a 7-year resident, went on to get a master's and a PhD in physiology, and then joined Dr. Pruitt in the burn unit here in San Antonio, Texas, and came to the faculty in 1979 and was full tenure professor within about 8 years. And he's been here ever since practicing, and now is the vice chair for academic affairs and faculty development in the department since 2010. Recipient of numerous awards, lots of teaching awards from the residents and medical students. So the title of his talk, Not All Left-Handers Are in the Right Mind, which he probably knows a lot about since he's wrong-handed. And let's welcome Dr. Sirinek.
I noticed Dr. Pruitt getting chest pain when you reminded him that we had been together for 3 years. My wife picked the topic, obviously, because she's been telling me this for the past 50 years. I thought this would be an interesting topic for us. I have no financial disclosures. In addition, I am not a neurosurgeon, neurologist, or a neuroscientist, so you'll have to take what I say with a grain of salt. I figured we would talk about the right-handed world, define handedness, talk about the cerebral hemispheres and how the pairing of handedness and language takes place, talk about the hemispheres, the corpus callosum for communication, more recent MRI studies, evolution, genetics, other lefties, traits of left-handed people, famous left-handed people, in particular looking at baseball. And there are perils, more than I ever wanted to know about being left-handed, and I'm sure you're going to really enjoy this. There is one study looking at surgery residents and practicing surgeons who are left-handed, and then my own personal experience. It all starts with the parochial education in Chicago. Veronica, you said it would work if I touched it.
Oh. Shit Creek. Ow! Christ, Jake, take it easy, man. Ow, shit. Jesus Christ.
Now Jake and Elwood did something bad, but this is kind of what happened to us left-handers. How do we get it off? Huh?
It's done. It's done.
I wanted to put another slide in with Veronica's picture that she's the brain behind the left-hander. So it is a right-handed world. We love cars, and about the only thing you do, everything is right-footed, gas pedal, brake pedal. Everything is with your right hand except for a few things. You have to stick your left hand out to go ahead and make a left-hand turn. Unless you're British. Enemies of the left-hander. If anybody of you in the audience are left-handed, you'll recognize everything, especially us in the surgical field, with scissors. We were discriminated against with school desks, ballpoint pens, can openers, you go on. In particular, until I had my right hand in a cast, I didn't realize that zippers are right-handed, and so are buttons on your shirt. You looked like a cripple operating a zipper. These are my top enemies. Spiral notebook. They have classrooms with left-handed desks, but back in my era, we had to turn the paper upside down. You always had to tell your date, where to sit at the table, and if it's in a booth, which side of the booth to take so you didn't bump elbows. There's the classic pencil hand going across, smearing the zipper. Cards, you can't spread them to the left. You only see the top card. Scissors. I didn't have this problem shooting a rifle because I'm right-eye dominant, but if you shoot left-handed, you have the pleasure of every shell coming out and hitting you in the face. Kind of affects your marksmanship. So what is handedness? Well, it's dominance of one hand over the other. There's an unequal distribution of fine motor skills. There's a tendency of humans to be more dexterous with one hand, and a lot of practice in fine motor skills, like writing, involves handedness. And it also requires for coordination of a large group of muscles to carry out a smooth action, like throwing a ball. Both activities require many neurons in the brain that are tightly concentrated and specialized with neurologic wiring. Laterality is a more common term, a more broader term, and it refers to one side of the body, like if you have left eye dominance. There are 5 types of handedness. Right-handed makes up 90% of the world's population, and 2/3 of them are strongly right-handed, which means they do everything with their right hand. Interestingly, the DNA molecule has a right spiral. Left-handedness, sinistrality, more dexterous with the left hand, only 10% of the world's population, and only 1/3 of them, 3%, use their left hand for all activities. Interestingly, the heart is a little bit more on the left side. Mixed-handedness, there's cross-dominance. They perform different tasks better with different hands, depending on the task. It's only 1% of the world's population. And when you take the other 30% right-handed and the other 7% left-handed, these people are affectionately called weak-handed 1/3 of the time. There is another category, ambidexterity, where they can perform any task equally well with either hand. This is very rare, less than 1% of the population, and usually people sway towards dominance with one hand or the other. Most left-handers learn to become ambidextrous because we're living in a right-handed world and cannot help it. Teaching surgery residents for the past 35 years, I thought this is an interesting category. Ambivalous, where they're equally poor with both hands. We've seen that occasionally in the operating room. It's supposed to be rare, and it's usually as a result of a debilitating physical condition. So when Dr. Dent is interviewing candidates today, I hope he takes that into mind. Again, right and left has been associated with good and bad. So left, you have 2 left feet, good. That person is your right-hand man. Sinister, evil, associated with the devil. In Genesis, God created the world with his right hand. In the Old Testament, the cursed were put on God's left side. If you were saved, you were on the right hand of God. Interestingly, warlike nations, 1/4 of the population are left-handed. Peaceful nation, only 5%. Starting to understand why I spent a lot of time in the principal's office. Cerebrality is another term that you may hear, and it has to do with right and left dimers in physics and chemistry and mathematics. It was first described by Louis Pasteur, and it's an object is sterile if you cannot superimpose it on its mirror image. And in the body, we have left amino acids and dextro sugars. This same type of cerebrality occurs with quarks, electrons, and neutrinos. Again, it's interesting to look at the brain. Anytime you look at any anatomy book, it only shows you the left side of the brain. Broca's era, he was a neurologist and a neurosurgeon, and described the area that's important for word formation. Wernicke was a German physiologist and came up with the idea isolated the idea for language comprehension. And the left hemisphere is important for math, analytical thinking, and logical processing. The right hemisphere is for space recognition, face recognition, sense perception, emotion, artistic functions, and prosody, which is emotive control of speech. I'm not quite sure I've ever had that. In the 1960s, it was called the Wada test, where neurosurgeons anesthetized one side of the brain before they operated on the patient with sodium amytal, and they were trying to decide which side of the hemisphere the patient had for language so that they would be particularly careful not to damage that part. It soon became obvious, though, that the pairing of handedness and language was a little bit more complicated. In the 1980s, Spring and Deutsch showed that 95% of right-handed people have their language in the left hemisphere. And so that just leaves 5% that have it in the right hemisphere. Lefties are a little more complicated. Only 19%, we thought all of us had a dominant right hemisphere, but only 19% have a dominant hemisphere. 20% have both hemispheres for language, and 61%, it's still the left hemisphere that's dominant for language. Ambidextrous people follow left-handed people. Not necessarily a good thing. So when you look at it, 93% of all people have a left hemisphere dominance for language. So if you're going to have a stroke, you don't want to have it 93% of the time on the left side. Handedness, they showed that there's a lateralization, a specialization of brain areas, and it's more marked in humans, but it also is in humans, in other animals. There's a marked progression of handedness from childhood to adulthood. A lot of it starts in utero. You can watch the fetus use one hand or the other. The other. Physically, the left hemisphere is larger, more developed. Broca's and Wernicke's area that we talked about is 3 times larger in the left hemisphere. The motor cortex on the left side is bigger, denser, and more sensitive. The central sulcus is deeper and more dramatic on the left. Greater cell packing, neural links more tightly connected for faster response times, and greater facility to process rapid stimuli. The left-hander's right hemisphere is also all those categories, but they're not as marked. So there is a difference. The left hemisphere can focus on detail, focus on small fragments, and motor skills requiring a series of discrete steps. The right hemisphere gives you a broader background picture, position of objects in space, and the ability to handle emotion and metaphorical aspects of speech. 2 interesting demonstrations. If you have a large letter R made of many small L's, the left hemisphere will focus on the small L's, the right will focus on the R. If you switch from letters to an object, it's just the opposite. The left hemisphere will focus on an anchor, and the right hemisphere will focus on the cups making up the anchor. It's interesting in music. The left hemisphere is responsible for rhythm and pitch, the right hemisphere for melody. Musicians playing 2-handed wind or string instruments are usually mixed or left-handed. Piano players are more likely to be one hand dominant over the other. If you have a left-handed piano player, it's been rumored they have trouble keeping rhythm. Thinking in the left hemisphere is called divergent. It moves outward from a conventional knowledge into an unexplained association. The right hemisphere is convergent, fairly focused application of existing knowledge to obtain a correct answer. If you cut the corpus callosum, which we'll talk about momentarily, the right hand will have a well-formed drawing, but no concept of space or form. The left hand, it'll be messy in the figure, but it will have very good 3-dimensional spatial relationship and form. The corpus callosum is called the great cerebral commissure. It's there in the middle of the brain, going from fore to aft. It comes from Latin, means tough body. Originally, I thought it was just a piece of meat holding the right and left hemisphere together. But obviously, it's a very sophisticated neural connection between both hemispheres. There are 200 million axons. It's the largest bundle of nerve fibers and the largest collection of white matter in the brain. And it communicates not only with the other hemisphere, but with the rest of the brain. The cross-sectional area is 700 square meters, and it has a high myelin content, which facilitates quick transmission of data. If you compare this to the optic nerve, there's only about 1.5 million axons, and the square meters is about 20. Interesting experiment from the University of Chicago by a graduate student in psychology in 1955, Ron Mayers. It was a cat experiment where the cat was in a box with two screens, one with a circle and one with a square. And he taught the cat to press his nose on the circle. He rewarded the cat with food and punished it with a loud noise. The task was mastered by the cat with one eye covered after 1,000 attempts. I can't imagine the patience of this particular individual. Pavlov would have never done his experiments with dogs if it took 1,000 attempts, but we all know about cats. The cat mastered the test with the left eye alone and successful test with the right eye alone. He then cut the optic chiasm, which you can see at the bottom there with the crossing fibers. It hits the lateral part of the retina, it's the medial part of the retina, which gives you lateral vision. And when he did that from fore to aft, the task was still the same. The cat learned the task with one eye and was successful with the other eye. He then went ahead and cut the corpus callosum in half, again, fore to aft. When he did that, the cat failed the test learned with one eye and tested with the other eye. So even though there were fibers from each eye going back to the optic part of the brain, it was the optic chiasm that helped with the communication with vision. The corpus callosum exerts both excitatory and inhibitory influence on the contralateral hemisphere, but predominantly it's excitatory. It transfers both motor, sensory, and cognitive information between the hemispheres, including eye movement and vision, as we showed in the previous experiment. And it maintains a balance between you being aware of your environment and paying attention to it, along with tactile sensation. As the corpus callosum goes from front to back, it is intimately integrated with the frontal, temporal, and occipital lobes. And in utero, it shows up between 12 and 20 weeks. People who are left-handed have a thicker and a more developed corpus callosum, and it's thought this is to facilitate the additional inter-hemispheric communication or crosstalk that's required because they are not left brain dominant. The potential drawback is it's got to filter out a lot of crosstalk in order to prevent stimuli overstimulation, and this is thought to cause some problems in left-handed people. Therefore, they have more trouble with tasks requiring multiple tasking and independent processing. Examples, it's difficult to pat and rub your abdomen at the same time. And this one I thought was interesting, interpreting the word blue if it's written in green ink. The brain was shown to be more complicated than thought as far as handedness and speech in 2009 when MRI came around. Face recognition, normally a right hemisphere function, is in the left hemisphere of left-handers. The ability to order or sequence manual activities is in the left hemisphere, whether you're right-handed or left-handed. Wiring of the brain of left-handers, despite left hemisphere dominance, is less strict and confirmed, and it's called random cerebral variation and may account for some of the bizarre personality problems. Both left and mixed-handers exhibit more varied, unpredictable, and diffuse cerebral activity. And language for left-handers is more diffuse, and they think leads to dyslexia. The brain of converted left-handers to right-handers, as you saw with the nuns beating on us, has most motor and sensory integration input in the left hemisphere, just like an original right-hander. This slide shows development to our ancestors 10 million years ago, when you would expect the distribution to be 50-50, and rapidly it became a right-handed world for the human race. It's in logarithm across the abscissa, and it almost went to 0 a million years ago, bopped up back to 10%, and that's where it is, except for that short period of time in the 1800s. And this slide shows that from about 1800 to 1950, there was a drop in the usual 10 to 12% of left-handers down to 2%. Society spent a lot of time discriminating against left-handers and converting them. Both my grandfather and my father were made to be right-handed. Inheritance, there was proposed initially that there was just a single gene that was responsible for this. The researchers didn't really care about handedness. What they were really concerned about is its pairing with speech, and that's why it was studied and thought to be a dominant non-Mendelian inheritance pattern. Subsequent studies showed there might have been an enzyme, PKSK6, which is a protease that's responsible for cleaving the right and left axis. And it's been shown to be linked in patients with dyslexia. Studies in right-handed parents of left-handed children demonstrate there are candidate regions on chromosomes 10 and 1. And a big meta-analysis on a large genome-wide association study showed there's probably at least 40 loci involved. Current theory, it's not just genetics, it's environment, and we have a social culture that is basically unfriendly to left-handed people. Inheritance of having a left-handed child, if both parents are right-handed, 9.5%, one right, one left, almost 20%, two left-handed people, 26%. If two left-handed people, if they have one twin is left-handed, 76% of the time both twins will be left-handed. There's a little bit higher incidence in identical twins, higher incidence in men compared to women, a ratio 1.23. So 1 in 9 males and 1 in 13 females are left-handed. The older the woman is at the time of birth, the higher the incidence of the child being left-handed. And over time, with age in the population, the incidence of the number of people in the population left-handed goes down dramatically. People hypothesize that they're dying from accidents from being in a right-handed world. Handedness is not only in humans. The honeysuckle twines to the left. There is a Pacific sand dab. Most of the flatfish lie on the ocean floor with their right side up, but this particular one lies with its left fin up. It's rare to have seashells with curves to the left. If you ever find one, it's worth a lot of money. And it was interesting to find out that kangaroos are left-handed or left-pawed or whatever. Here's a picture of the kangaroo with the joey in the pouch. I took the slide out. Originally, I had a picture of the kangaroo with Dr. Stewart's face on it and Dr. Lau in the pouch. I only took it out because I didn't know you were showing up, Lily. They do leave the pouch eventually. You never know. The traits of left-handed people, they're supposed to be more intuitive, empathetic. They're great at visual spatial ability. That makes them better artists. They think out of the box, hot-temperedness. Sometimes they are solitary. They are kind of iconoclastic and like to tear down institutions. They do take risks, they experiment, and they are a little bit Walter Mitty, living in their own little world. Famous left-handers, Art, Michelangelo, Raphael, Rembrandt, and Escher from MIT, Da Vinci, Einstein. 4/5 of the Mac inventors were left-handed, along with Albert Schweitzer. I was disturbed to find out that 20% of Hollywood is left-handed, but it would take up about 20 slides to list all of them, but it goes from Judy Garland, Marilyn Monroe, all the way to Charlie Chaplin. Interestingly, Disney's animated princesses, 7 of them are left-handed, and a lot of the cartoonists are left-handed. The guy that draws Bart Simpson is left-handed, and Bart Simpson is left-handed. Musicians, 2 out of the 4 Beatles, David Bowie, Paul Simon, Barry Gibb, Mickey Dolenz. Presidents, 8 out of 45 of our presidents were left-handed. They think there might even be a higher percentage. If you go further back, it's where they were changing people to be right-handed from left-handed. 5 of our last 7 presidents, 5 of our 8 last presidents were left-handed. Criminals, I was surprised to find out Jack the Ripper, Dillinger, the infamous gangster, and the Boston Strangler were also left-handed. Some of that anger went over to conquerors, Alexander the Great, Charlemagne, Caesar, Napoleon, Fidel Castro, Schwarzkopf with his war, and Ramses, the Egyptian. And there's the 7 princesses. I also was going to put a picture of Lily in there too, but. So, in baseball, you can be left-handed if it's an interactive sport. Non-interactive, swimming, gymnastics, not really, but a higher incidence. And it's interesting because in boxing, what happens is you're fighting an individual who's not used to boxing, a left-handed person, which gives a little bit of advantage. Lots of baseball players left-handed, going all the way back to the famous Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth, all the way up to common time. 25% of the 2016 players were in the baseball league are left-handers. A few left-handers in basketball, our own David Robinson and Ginobili. Football, kind of rare, like 1.5%, Tim Tebow and Mike Vick. And the only left-hander in the Hall of Fame is Steve Young. Golf, kind of hard to find left-handed golf clubs. Boxing, our own Oscar De La Hoya from San Antonio. Tennis, John McEnroe, bad boy. Now we understand why. Joan of Arc, John McCain, Henry Ford, and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. The Meyer brothers, as we used to say, are both left-handed, and it's stated, and I haven't confirmed it, is that out of honor to the Mayo Clinic Mayo brothers, everybody every day gowns with their left hand first. Still is taking place. Okay.
When you scrub, left hand first instead of
Left hand first. Hallelujah. Here, personally, we have 7 people that would admit being left-handed in different specialties. Both Dr. Wynn and Dr. Shireman, they write left-handed, but they operate right-handed. Baseball favors left-handers, and why are we called southpaws? Well, most baseball diamonds are positioned that home plate is in the west. So a left-handed pitcher is looking at first base, which is in the south, so therefore they became known as southpaws. Baseball's rigged, they say, for lefties. Right field is shorter in most parks. Left-handed batter is facing a right-handed pitcher, has a clearer view of the ball compared to a right-handed batter. The left-hander stands about 5 feet closer to first base. They can get there 1/6 of a second faster. I don't know if that's really important or not. The left-hander's momentum carries him toward first base compared to the right-hander swinging, which pulls him towards third base. And it's more difficult to steal second base from a left-handed pitcher because you're looking right at the first base. First base and right field favors left-handers because they have a better angle to throw to second, third, and home plate. A left-handed pitch naturally moves away from the right-handed batter and into a lefty. They hypothesize that this has something to do with us living in a right-handed world, and somehow that happens physiologically. The majority of pitchers are right-handed, so left batters have a higher batting average, and the number one batting average is Ty Cobb, who was left-handed, with 366. Alleged benefits: 20% of Mensa members are lefties, 13% greater lifetime wealth for college graduates. They can see better underwater. I can only hypothesize that has to do with spatial ability. They're better able to multitask, better memory, better at video games despite the controller being right-handed. They recover faster from strokes because of that cross-communication across the corpus callosum. And they're more likely to pursue visual than language-based careers. And at one college, 43% of the art majors were left-handed. They're actually faster in typing because of the QWERTY text keyboard. I never realized this, but you can type 3,400 words solely with your left hand, but you can only type 450 solely with your right hand. Left-handers choose left lanes, right-handers choose right lanes, and even Disney tells you when you're visiting, go to the left lanes. There are fewer people there because there are fewer left-handers. It's easier to write in Hebrew, Arabic, Chinese. Ooh, we missed one. I'm so sorry, Dr. Lau. It was that QWERTY right-handed typist and my bad editorial and Japanese. And I'm sorry, I didn't get a chance to put your example in of Chinese writing from the right side to the left. Despite U.S. cars favoring right-handed drivers, left-handers have a higher first-time pass rate for the driving test, and we talked about the sports advantage already. Unfortunately, there are perils associated with being left-handed. 85% higher chance of getting in a motor vehicle crash, 54% more likely to get hurt using tools, know that personally. 49% more likely to have an accident at home, or 20% more likely to have an accident at work. They're 5 times more likely to suffer an amputation, and a higher percentage of the time they amputate their dominant hand because they're using a right-handed tool. They have more afflictions with allergies, insomnia, and migraine headaches, and an alleged delayed onset of puberty. I was really disappointed to find the next category, that there's a higher incidence of left-handed people who have dyslexia, schizophrenia, bipolar, autism, homosexuality, pedophilia, and alcoholism. So I'm sure that this is going to come back to haunt me in the operating room when I'm giving some of you grief. Demographics. Well, there was a nice left-handed study of both residents and practicing surgeons that came out of Lenox Hill and Germany. They had an 80% response rate for 68 people. 1/5 were women, the median age 45 years. 2/3 were general surgeons. The median time in practice was 12 years. 13 were still residents in training. 69% were left-handed, and 31% said they were ambidextrous. They use their left hand for writing 90% of the time, shaving 92%, throwing a ball 80%, OR instruments 70%, right-handed for a computer mouse 68%. I guess in modern days you can take the mouse and switch it around to use your left hand. 1/3 of them had a pressure put upon them to switch to being right-handed during childhood, and this occurred from parents, teachers, or their peers. During the residency, the program caring about laterality, the majority of them, the residency did not care whether they were right-handed or left-handed. 4 out of the 68 were advised to quit. 3 out of the 68 were offered help, and 1 resident was asked to quit. It may not be because they were left-handed. Only 10 out of the 68 were offered some type of mentoring for them being left-handed. Faculty annoyed by them being left-handed almost 2/3 of the time. Provided with left-handed instruments only 13% of the time, although they were available 100% of the time. Considered leaving surgery, 3, and 1 did change specialty from CT. If they're going to put a Foley in, they do it from the right side of the bed only 12% of the time, and over half of the time it's from the left side. Arterial cannulation, they prefer the left arm. Radial artery 59%, phlebotomy 78%. And for venous cannulation, the #1 choice was the left subclavian. I was actually surprised that the right jugular was more common than the left. I'm not, Dr. Myers, any preference? No? Whatever is available. All right, operating room experience laterality was documented on their OR cards only 1/3 of the time. They had to constantly remind the nurse that they were left-handed 75% of the time. Aggravating the right foot, they used the right foot for the Bowie pedal 60% of the time. They felt that they had a higher incidence of needle sticks compared to their right-handed colleagues, and the onset of laparoscopy didn't really improve the laterality of instrument problems. Career experience, 80% of them felt like it was not a disadvantage to be left-handed. 75% of their patients did notice that they were left-handed. However, 94% of them did not express any concern. What bothered me is that in the same report, these 68 left-handed surgeons said they would rather be operated on by a right-handed surgeon 10% of the time. My own personal experience, we did have 4 complete sets of left-handed instruments, which included hemostats. Probably the only thing we needed were left-handed scissors and left-handed needle holders. Only 2 out of the 12 general surgeons were left-handed. With 4 chiefs and 10 interns, there were only 26 residents, and I was the only left-handed resident when I was a chief. We were allowed to use the left-handed equipment when we were chiefs, and my preference card did say I was left-handed. I'm sure there were some comments after it. The OR scrub nurse was always attentive to the left-handed surgeons, and it wasn't because of me. I'm sure it was because of the 2 left-handed faculty. It was always, there was safe passing of sharps, and I didn't incur any needle sticks as a resident. I'm on a first-name basis with employee health here for needle sticks as a faculty. And occasionally I had to remind the nurse that I was left-handed. Place at the OR table, we were forced to operate from the right side of the table, same as right-handed surgeons. And that forced me to use my right hand a lot. And one of the reasons why I think left-handed surgeons are better with their non-dominant hand compared to vice versa. None of my patients ever asked me about my handedness. Feedback during the residency, I was not asked any handedness during my interview. I never asked for help. I'm sure it would have been viewed as a weakness. And I didn't get any unsolicited help. I did get feedback in the following: ambi-confused, ambi-awkward, no dominant hemisphere, non-dexterous, and Dr. Zollinger's famous buttress phalanges multiformis sinistra, which allegedly in Latin means multiple deformed fingers on the left hand, roughly translated. And in conclusion then, we do have our own day, August 13th. I know it comes 9 days before Veronica's birthday. Or no, that's right, it's in November. How could I forget after all these years? And I think that's it. I don't want to play the videos. All right, thank you very much. Can I answer any questions? Dr. Aubergili.
Thank you for this informative lecture. If Dr. Cushing
Right
was
hand.
here- If Dr. Cushing was here, or Professor Hester would be very proud to hear this display of physiology, neurophysiology. There's one question I'd like to ask you. Where is the hippocampus located? This is where they claim all the storage, all the knowledge are located, the hippocampus in the brain.
Actually, when they looked at the limbic system, including the amygdala, there is a little bit of exaggeration to the left side, but not as demonstrated with the hemispheres. That's more associated with, other processing like emotion. I should have known that about Dr. Cushing. My mentor at Ohio State, I think, was an intern when Cushing did his first craniotomy, if I remember correctly. Dr. Myers, have you suffered? Not with my talk, but, or working with me as a resident.
School desks, like in elementary school, middle school, yeah, you had to spin around,
Yeah.
and sometimes you fell out, especially if people were squirming like all over.
There was one other test from neurology, and Peter Fox, who is head of our imaging center here, is a neurologist, and he was surprised that a surgeon knew this. But there was one test where they found that if you're left-handed, you were presumed to be right brain dominant. And they were having left-handed people who were right brain dominant who were not aphasic. And what they found out is that left-handed people who write like this are still left brain dominant, like we talked about, like 60%. Us cripples, we're still in the left hemisphere. And not in the right hemisphere. But if you write like this, you're in the right hemisphere, based on strokes. All right, thank you very much.
Sure.
All right, let's go.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alina. I'm a third-year surgery resident, and I'll be presenting a complication for